Hello to everyone who has joined us so far. We are going to start in just about a minute or two, so please sit tight and we will be with you very shortly. Thanks. All right, it looks like we are leveling off in terms of participants joining us, so I am going to go ahead and jump in. Hello, everyone. My name is Diani Faiga. I'm the Director of Preservation Services at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you all here this afternoon to our final program in this series about working with some of the external stakeholders who have an integral role in collections care. This program is made possible with funding primarily from the National Endowment for the Humanities. And I'm going to turn things over to our speakers, Amelia Burm-Emig and Maggie Downing, in just a few minutes, but have a few quick pieces of housekeeping before we jump in. So first off, there was instruction in the chat, but also if you would like to follow along with closed captions, you may need to activate that setting within your Zoom interface. So toward the bottom of your screen, you should see a box that says CC live transcript, or it may say more. Click that and then click show subtitle. There may be a lag, but then they should appear. Today's event is set up as a webinar, which among some other things means that participants cannot actually speak and interact beyond typing in the chat box. So if you have questions, please go ahead and drop them there. And this program is being recorded for folks to be able to catch up if they are not able to join us live. And finally, at the end of the session today, you will be directed immediately to a very quick post-program survey. These evaluations really will only take you a few minutes to fill out and are very important for us, not only to share with our funders, but for us to be able to continually learn and improve our program offerings. And with that, I will turn everything over to the Conservation Center's Preservation Specialist, Amelia Burm-Emig, and our Manager of Digital Imaging, Maggie Downing. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. Again, my name is Amelia Emig. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a preservation specialist with the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. I am speaking with you today from the great Iron City of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I would like to acknowledge that Pittsburgh is built on the traditional ancestral lands of the Shawnee and Osage and other Native peoples who came before us. So thank you for joining us for the final episode in this series, which has focused on the working relationships between cultural institutions and 4 different external groups. Today, we will look at making decisions about digitization and working with digitization vendors. And the previous sessions have discussed artifact donors, fine art service providers, and conservators. Each of these stakeholders can be an important partner for an archive, library, or museum as you care for your collections. And so with this series, we have been spotlighting these groups, looking at who they are and what they do, and offering some tips that can hopefully benefit the relationships from both sides. So before we get started, and apologies for the repeat if you were with us in recent weeks, but a quick note about our organization, the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts, or CCAHA. We are a nonprofit conservation lab and preservation services facility. Our conservators specialize in the treatment of paper-based items, including books, photographs, and works on paper. Our preservation services staff, of which I am a part, work in the field, presenting education programs and helping institutions to plan for the future of their collections. CCAHA also offers digitization services, fundraising assistance, housing and framing, and more. We are based in Philadelphia, but we work with clients and organizations all across the country. And you can learn more about us and what we do at our website, ccaha.org. So I'd like to introduce my co-presenter for today, Maggie Downing. Hello, Maggie.
Hi, Amelia. Thank you. My name is Maggie. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the manager of digital imaging at the Conservation Center. In this role, I oversee all of our imaging projects, including printing, facsimile printing, large-scale digitization projects, as well as very small projects for 1 or 2 items. I provide quality control, client communication, and I also provide consultation in large-scale digitization project planning and digital preservation. So happy to be here today.
So Maggie and our digitization and reproduction team do some incredible work with all kinds of cool collections, and I am so glad that Maggie's joining us today. So one of the things that Maggie and I chatted about while working on this program is how digitization and digital preservation are something that collection staff at many organizations, especially smaller sites, often don't have much experience with in their day-to-day work. So from those of you who are with us today, it would be interesting to know, how many of you have worked on a digitization project with something in your collections. So we'll put up a poll, and if yes, if you have worked on a project, was it done in-house or did you work with an outside vendor? So if you can weigh in there, we would appreciate it. We'll give a little bit of time for you to cast your votes. So digitization is a complex topic, and it is very understandable if it all feels a bit overwhelming to think about these types of projects. So it looks like we have sub numbers in. Looks like 85% of you responding say you have done a digitization project so far, so that's great. And of those of you who have, it's split almost evenly, with half of you having done it in-house and half of you having worked with an outside vendor. So that's great. That's a nice mix. And for the 15% of you who have not worked on a project yet, hopefully we've got some good ideas in here for you to help you get started on that. So thank you for weighing in. But to hopefully start making all of this, these topics, digitization and digital preservation, feel a little bit less intimidating, let's begin with a look at what goes into digital preservation. Becoming more familiar with the components of digital preservation is really helpful before starting into a digitization project, because it can inform how you approach and shape the project, and also how you go about working with an outside vendor. So digital preservation is preservation that ensures long-term access to digital materials. Here we have the American Library Association's mid-length definition, which says that digital preservation combines policies, strategies, and actions to ensure access to digital content, regardless of the challenges of media failure and technological change. The goal of digital preservation is the accurate rendering of authenticated content over time. And we'll talk about why that's important and what goes into making that happen.
Yeah, so just to echo a little bit of what Amelia just said, we're talking about digital preservation here at the beginning of this session because it's important to talk about and think about digital preservation before you begin a digitization project. The main reason for that is that you want to protect your investment. So you don't want to spend, the time, the money, and the effort to digitize collections of materials just to neglect them on a hard drive where they might be forgotten about. And so you just want to be able to ensure that your digital records are protected over time. Because the reality is there's a lot of threats to digital records that don't really apply to physical collections. Perhaps the most obvious one is technology obsolescence. And by that, it means that file formats and digital media go out of style very fast. So, you know, for example, 20 years ago, or even less, we were using floppy disks to store files on. And now it's almost impossible to find a way to read those unless you have specialized equipment. Starting to see CD drives and USB drives go out of style on larger or on newer computers. And same with file formats, just the type of files can also go out of fashion, and when they're not being used a lot, they're not supported a lot in operating systems and software programs. So it takes a lot of active management to ensure your digital records are safe. There's also, I mean, there's ways you can store your files. It can be kind of easy to accidentally delete your files or click and drag them into a folder that they don't belong and you can no longer find them. And unfortunately, viruses, malware, hacking are threats to everybody who works in the digital field. So one thing you can do to create a system of backups. There's an acronym in the field of digital preservation called LOCKSS, which just stands for lots of copies, keep stuff safe. And an ideal practice for that is the 3-2-1 principle for backups. So that would be keeping 3 copies of your digital files on 2 different types of media with 1 in a different location. So an example of this at an institution might be 3 copies of your files. So one could be on a networked server, another set could be on a backup server, and a third set could be in the cloud. So that's one example of a great example of following the 3-2-1 principle. And you can go to the next slide. The other thing I want to note is that digital preservation is more than just this backup storage, so that is a very important component. It really requires ongoing action to monitor your files to make sure they haven't changed over time. And it also includes maintaining your technical infrastructure, so making sure your hardware and software are up to date and supported. Your facilities where you keep the hardware, software, server systems are well kept. And any supplies that you have are in stock. And also think about a schedule for migrating files as needed off of older media or to newer file formats. You can consider a migration schedule every 5 to 10 years. It doesn't necessarily mean that you will need to migrate files off of a media or to a different format, but that's a good schedule to look at your files, look at the field of digital preservation, kind of see where trends are going, and make a decision at that point too. Next slide. There we go.
Great, thank you. So like physical preservation, digital preservation also includes aspects of traditional collections management, including policies and plans. So there are 2 documents in particular that are central to an organization's digital preservation efforts: a digital preservation policy and a digitization plan. So let's talk about those next. So first up, the digital preservation policy. So this policy documents an organization's commitment to preserve digital content for future use. It will specify file formats to be preserved and the level of preservation to be provided. It will ensure compliance with standards and best practices for responsible stewardship of digital information. We have included some examples of digital preservation policies in the resource list, so you can get a better idea of what goes into this kind of document. Something else to note about the digital preservation policy and the digitization plan is that these are also important to have when you're dealing with your own institutional records, especially if you are creating a new institutional records management program for your site, but also if you are existing, you're updating management program. And next, we'll talk about the digitization plan. So the Digitization Plan is a document that guides the specifics of your institution's digitization efforts. To get started on a digitization plan, you can begin with any existing digitization workflow that you have and build up from there. The plan should include guidelines for prioritizing and selecting items for digitization, handling guidelines for collection objects, preparing a workspace, and keeping materials in order. It should also include technical specifications for equipment and software. So that's things like scanners, cameras, and digital asset management software, as well as metadata standards and file specifications. And we'll talk more about all of these things as we go on, starting with metadata. So metadata standards are something that comes up a lot in general with digitization projects and digital preservation, and there's a lot going on with this term. So it's an important one to understand. So Maggie, would you mind talking about what goes into metadata?
Yeah, so we have the definition of metadata as structured information that describes, explains, locates, or otherwise makes it easier to retrieve, use, or manage an information resource. That is kind of a mouthful, so I'll try to break this down a little bit more and talk about what that means. So on the slide, I like to use this herbarium specimen to show an example of metadata. So we have the actual plant, which would be considered the information resource. And then we also have information about its name, where it was found, the catalog number within the museum. There's a color chart and a scale to show the size of the plant. So all of that contextual information is an example of metadata. So the description and the scale help to describe the plant so that it's useful to researchers, and the catalog number and barcode help to locate, retrieve, and manage the specimen. So there's different types of metadata for digital files that serve different purposes. Some metadata is the same kind that you may already be recording for physical materials through object records, mark records, or finding aids, for example. So descriptive metadata obviously describes an item. It can include information like the title, the date, the subject, the description. And administrative metadata helps you manage an item. So that can include information like copyright or any access restrictions, location information, things like that. But there's some metadata that's just used for digital files. That includes the technical, structural, and preservation metadata. So technical metadata is information about the digital file. That can include the scanner or camera that was used to create it, the date it was created, pixel dimensions, and that's usually created automatically and embedded right into your files. Structural metadata records how a digital file relates to other files, such as whether a file is a page in a book and where that file should fall in order. And then preservation metadata is information used in digital preservation. So this can include information of like checksums, virus scans, any history of data corruption or recovery, and information on when files were transferred.
So file specifications are also outlined in a digitization plan. And these specs will cover information that includes file type, resolution, bit depth, and color space. And they should be based on published standards and best practices. So Maggie, could you talk about some of the sources for standards for this type of information?
Yes, I've listed 3 of them here. These are kind of the main ones in the United States. There's the American Library Association, or ALA's minimum digitization capture recommendations. There's the National Archives and Records Administration, or NARA, their technical guidelines for digitizing archival materials. And the federal agency's Digitization Guidelines Initiative, or FADGI, and their technical guidelines for digitizing cultural heritage materials. Each of these is useful in its own way. The ALA guidelines are nice because they actually have pictures and illustrations to talk about the different points that they make. The NARA guidelines are helpful because they, in addition to file specifications, they also talk about workflow examples and include recommendations for metadata and quality control. The FADGI guidelines of the three is the most recently updated, and this is used by a lot of government institutions. The FADGI guidelines are my preferred, or CCAHA's preferred reference point for determining file specifications like file type, resolution, bit depth, and color space for different types of materials. But again, each of these has strengths, so I did want to include all of them.
Awesome, thank you. So a listing of collections that are priorities for digitization should also be part of your site's digitization plan. The priorities list can also take the shape of a separate formal digital selection plan if that makes more sense for your site. Determining your priorities might be a challenge if your site hasn't thought about your collection in this way before, and it's a process that should be given plenty of time for discussion. But this is definitely an important and helpful step, so let's take a closer look at it. There are several good reasons for creating a priority list, and here are just a few. Creating priorities allows you to better outline the scope and goals of your project, and that helps you to make more efficient decisions about the entire project, including choosing a vendor that's a good match for the services that you need. Having a clearly defined outcome also gives you a stronger case as you advocate for funding, staff, and equipment to make a project happen. And having your priorities identified can help you to break down digitization efforts into specific and more manageable projects. Prioritization for digitizing materials can be based on a number of criteria. For starters, collections that are valuable to your institution, maybe items that speak strongly to the site's mission and goals, or items that have significant historical or even monetary value. Items that are frequently requested for access and use, whether that's in-house by your staff or by visitors, researchers, and other institutions are another good category to think about. And collections that are being used as part of a grant or fundraising appeal, something with specific purpose and funding. And then Maggie, do you want to talk about the rest of the list there?
Yeah, another criteria that you might prioritize a specific collection is collection uniformity and ease of handling. This is a big one, especially if you're starting out in digitization. Starting with a collection that is similar in size and material type and is easy to handle will help build project momentum. You'll be able to work through that collection a little bit faster and kind of build confidence in digitization. So for an example would be like a collection of 8x10 photographs that are in good condition, and you can start just kind of working through those and give yourself an easy win at the beginning of the project. But there's also some limiting factors that you should consider that might bump a collection lower on a priority list. So one of the criteria on here is the physical condition of materials, and that can be looked at in two ways. So materials that are actively deteriorating may be a higher priority to digitize. So things like color film negatives that are starting to shift in color, any acetate negatives that are beginning to warp or channel, or newspapers on brittle paper that's getting more and more brittle. You might want to make those a higher priority, but there's also, I mean, if you have collections of materials that are not actively deteriorating, but are still in need of some conservation treatment before they're safe to handle, those may be a lower priority until you can bring a conservator in to evaluate. So some examples for that kind of material would be like tightly rolled or folded documents, documents with iron gall ink deterioration, or stacks of glass negatives that are in their original boxes. Things that are stable, but if you want to like handle them for digitization, are going to need some sort of intervention. Other limiting factors would be works that are under copyright or where you're unsure of the copyright status. Because digitizing things and putting them online is a form of publication. It's often fair use, but it depends on a lot of different factors. So if you're unsure of a copyright status, I would set those aside until you can consult with an expert. And then also uniqueness of materials, whether or not your materials have already been published elsewhere. So if you have collections of published materials, books, or newspapers, think about if anybody else has already digitized them and done that work for you, because then you can refer researchers to that resource and put your money and effort into digitizing a collection that's more unique to your institution.
Great, thank you. So caring for the original materials is, of course, a central part of a digitization project. Certain types of collection items require special care when they're being handled, and these can include materials that are brittle, oversized items, rolled or warped documents, bound materials, works with friable media, so that's things like pastels, charcoal, chalk, some types of paint, and any photographic materials. Gloves are recommended when handling photos or objects made of metal, since those items are so sensitive to the oils and salts that are on our hands. But for many other types of paper-based items, like this great oversized poster you see the team handling in the image on the right, clean and dry hands are best for handling.
So there's a wide variety of equipment out there for digitization, and selecting equipment is going to depend on the type of material that you want to digitize, the level of staff technical expertise on your team, and your budget. But some common equipment for digitization includes a digital camera on a copy stand, which includes there's a lot of components to this. So you have your camera, which is mounted to a stand. You have a table that supports the object, 2 lights, and then you also need some accessories, including a light meter, a color chart, and a computer with a raw processing software. If you have expertise on your team and you have the right budget, this is a really great and flexible option for digitization. Your capture is instantaneous. You can digitize a lot of different types of materials with this setup. It's a very flexible and modular setup. So I recommend it if you have that, if you have the capacity for it. Another great option are flatbed scanners. These are a lot easier to set up. So if you're working with a volunteer team, it's easy to teach as well. They usually just sit right on a table. You don't have to control the light in the room, and they're typically pretty affordable as well. But you do have a slower scan time. They're not great for a lot of different materials like oversized things, bound objects, anything fragile or friable, curved, warped, or 3-dimensional in any way, because you have to close a lid and you don't want to crush anything. There's also all kinds of specialty scanners, dedicated types of equipment for books, for negatives, for oversized materials. But generally, unless you have a large and growing collection of specific materials that would require a dedicated specialty scanner, it's better just to outsource this to a vendor, because then you don't have to spend the money on the equipment and training. Okay. The next slide.
Great. So, all right, let's move on and talk about digitization vendors. And these are companies or organizations that can offer many kinds of services with digitizing, printing, and more. And we'll also look at some tips and ideas to keep in mind when you are searching for a company to work with, as well as information to include when you are ready to request a project proposal from a digitization vendor. So digitization vendors provide many services for collections in archives, libraries, and museums, and also for collections held by private clients, businesses, and other groups. These services can include high-resolution imaging, printing services, producing high-quality facsimiles for exhibition or display, image enhancement and digital restoration. And digital restoration services can enhance the appearance of a digital image by doing things like making faded inks more readable, editing the image to fill tears and losses, or retouching the image to reduce stains and other forms of damage. Vendors may also offer metadata services and OCR services. OCR is a technology that recognizes text within a digital image, and it's used to make that content more searchable to users, among other things. Digitization vendors might work on projects of all sizes for many types of clients. It could be one item for a private client. For example, if you have multiple family members that want a copy of a photograph, a vendor can enhance the image and create a high quality file that can be shared and printed. Vendors can also undertake large-scale digitization projects, like when our team at CCAHA digitized over 1,700 glass negatives from the libraries at St. Olaf College. So working with a digitization vendor has several benefits for an organization. And Maggie touched on a few of these, but an outside vendor can often help you to get a project done more quickly than you could do so on your own. Vendors have the technical expertise as well as the equipment needed, which can save you time and money on both of those fronts. Vendors also have the capability to execute projects with strong quality control measures that ensure that the results are of good and consistent quality. And the last point here, vendors are able to work with materials that may be difficult to digitize in-house. And that challenge may be because of the amount of the material. Maybe you have a huge quantity of negatives to do, or materials that are fragile, or things that are oversized and tough to maneuver. Maggie, something you mentioned was that you've seen a lot of institutions adopt a sort of hybrid approach to digitization. And I wondered if you could share that again with us here.
Yeah, so I provide consultation services to institutions that want to set up a digitization program. And oftentimes they'll adopt an approach where they will have some equipment in-house, like maybe a camera and a copy stand, or a set of flatbed scanners. And they'll work with their own staff and volunteer team to kind of move through the collection, but also work with vendors, typically on a grant-funded larger project basis, to work with things that they can't really do in-house with the limited equipment or staff time that they have. So that's a great way to kind of, if you have a project that's just distinct in scope, and that can be a really great opportunity for grant funding as well. So yeah, being open to both is a great way to look at digitization.
For sure. So as with the other vendors we've talked about in this series, recommendations from colleagues can be a good place to start when you're looking for a vendor. It can help to speak with organizations in your area and institutions with similar collections to see if they have had positive relationships, with certain vendors. Some other points to consider when looking for a vendor. First, written quality control procedures, something we've sort of mentioned in a few places here today, and we'll talk more about it next. But this ensures that the project is done to the best level possible and will meet your needs and goals. So it's important to speak with a vendor about the guidelines they have in place. A vendor should offer safe care and handling of your materials. So the experience and training of their staff is certainly something to ask about. Some vendors may be perfectly fine for standard materials that are in good condition, whereas other materials may benefit from a vendor experienced with fragile or high value items that need extra care or even the oversight of a conservator. You can ask for references and examples of the project the vendor has worked on before. And also ask about their facility and what systems they have in place to help protect the objects in their care. So that includes things like their security protocol, fire detection and suppression systems, and climate control. Then Maggie, do you want to talk about quality control for us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So just to talk more about quality control and what that means. A digitization vendor should have written quality control procedures that they can share and discuss with you. And these procedures should be specific in what the vendor is looking for when they're reviewing digitization projects. So for example, at the Conservation Center, we review 100% of raw files for correct color, cropping, and focus, so like for image quality. And then once final files are processed, we do another 100% check of final files for correct file naming, bit depth, file format, and color profile. And we do a 10% check again of image quality just to make sure that there was no errors in the processing. We have a 1% threshold for failure. So if anything isn't up to our standard, we'll reevaluate the whole batch and rescan as needed. So that should be something that a vendor should be able to talk about, just so you know that they're not just scanning everything and you get things that are upside down or cropped weird or crooked. That's another level that you should ensure that you're getting if you're paying for a vendor. Oh yeah, and we also wanted to discuss some file naming tips and conventions. So you can discuss this with a vendor, and you can also, I recommend having file naming conventions set up for any in-house digitization as well. File names should be unique and consistent in their structure. They should have some level of description, but not be individually descriptive. So for example, I have on the screen, this is for an archive scanning project. It has the description of the collection, which abbreviated description of the collection for narratives, it has a year, and then just a counter. So we have a little bit of description, but we're not individually typing in the file name what each page is about. But you also don't want to just have a number either. You want to have something that's kind of in between. You want to reduce the rate for human error, but still know kind of what you're looking at when you look at the file name. When you're creating file names, don't include any locations or shelf numbers. This can be tempting, especially if you don't have ID numbers for your collections. But when your locations change, then you're in big trouble. So I just wanted to throw that note in there too.
Good advice.
If you're thinking of working with a vendor and you want to get some estimates to include in a budget or a grant application, here's some information that you'll need to have to get an accurate estimate. First, you want to tell them the project timeline. So how fast do you need the project to be done? Think about whether the work can be done at the vendor's facility or on site at your facility. Because some vendors can bring their own equipment to your place. It's usually a much more expensive option, but it is an option for things that are very fragile, large, or can't be moved. The number and size of the documents that you want to digitize. This is because most vendors base their quotes on a per capture rate. So discussing linear feet or cubic feet isn't typically very helpful because the number of things in that space can vary greatly depending on how the items are folded or boxed. So it's very difficult to estimate based on just the amount of space the collection takes up. So even a little bit of estimating on number of pages will help you get a more accurate quote. Tell them the type of material. So if they're a mix, are they flat? Are they bound? Are they three-dimensional, or a mix of those? And talk about any condition issues you want to bring to their attention. So one example could be if materials are in mats that they need to be taken out of for digitization. If they're encapsulated in Mylar, that should be removed for digitization. If there's any fasteners or paper clips that you want the vendor to remove, or if there's any cleaning needs that you'd like to have addressed before digitization happens. File specifications, like we discussed, file naming needs, cropping, resolution, bit depth. If you aren't sure on that, a vendor can give you recommendations based on the standards and best practices that we discussed, based on the type of material that you have. So if you aren't sure on those like very technical details, that's okay. Think about if you want the vendor to embed any metadata at the collection level, like any copyright information or things like that. And then whether you want the quote to include any packing or transportation. Some vendors will be able to provide that or work with a shipper that can transport your materials, and then you can include that in the quote. So especially if you're working on a grant budget, think about all of these components that aren't just once the materials get to the vendor. Just kind of think about it in a big picture.
All right, we'll wrap up with a look at some of the resources that we've covered today. So there are a lot of good sources for things like background reference material, glossaries, and sample documents available online, so you can get as in-depth with this content as you like. Connecting to Collections Care has done a few good programs on digitization and care of digital collections, including one program from earlier this year that was presented by Maggie. The American Library Association, the federal agency's Digital Guidelines Initiative, and the National Archives and Records Administration sources that we talked about earlier are the three groups, that are sort of the leaders in standards and best practices. But they also offer other digitization and preservation resources. So take a look at their websites. The FADGI website, for example, has a good glossary of terms related to digitization and audiovisual material. And we've created a number of resources at CCAHA, and you can access that content on our website and our YouTube channel. Maggie did a really awesome program for us not too long ago called Introduction to Digitization. And in that, she shared a huge list of resources. And I would definitely encourage you to check that out. We have these resources and some others gathered on a separate list to share, and I hope that these will be of good use for you when you're working on digitization projects and digital preservation policy and planning with your organizations. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for tuning in today, and thank you, Maggie, so much for sharing your time with us. Our emails are listed here if you have questions and want to send a note later on. A brief survey will pop up after this call, and if you have a moment, we would appreciate your feedback because it does help us improve future programming. So thanks again, everyone, and if there are any questions that came up, we are happy to chat about those now. Happy to send out a copy of the PowerPoint. Yep, thank you so much.
I'll also just add that a lot of these topics go into a lot more detail in the Digitization 101 and 201 series on YouTube. So there's whole episodes on file storage, metadata, selecting equipment, and things like that. So if there's any topic that interests you more, they're kind of broken up into 30-minute sections that go more in depth.
It's a fantastic series. It's a really great resource.
Oh, I see a question here.
Okay.
Where can I learn more about how to start using Fixity? It's a serious problem if you have many digital files but not created. Oh, is it a serious problem if you have not created checksums for them? I would say it's not that serious of a problem. There's a program called Fixity Pro that's offered by AV Preserve. I believe it's $5 a month, and you can The program just it creates checksums and it runs fixity checks, and you can set it up to run automatically after you've created the initial checksums. I would also say, most institutions that I've consulted with are not using checksums and fixity. I think this is a fairly newer concern and an important one with easy solutions, with software solutions. But you're not alone if you're not creating fixity checks. But there's resources, I believe in the resources handout that link to that. So thanks for the question.
All right, again, if any questions come up later on, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll follow up with the resources on the presentation. But thank you so much for tuning in today, everyone.
Thank you.